All right, what is up, y'all? Happy Monday or Tuesday to you. Now, if you're seeing this video, it is because I have been unable to test negative for COVID. So even though I feel much better, I'm ready to go to work. I feel 100%. Obviously, I sound better than the last video where I didn't sound so good. Despite that, I can't come back to work until I have a negative test. So if you're watching this video, it's because I recorded it just in case I was unable to get a negative test on Monday morning, which is why I didn't want you to not have what you need for class today. And thus, here we are. So if you are watching this video, know that yes, I am still home. And yes, I am still angry to be home. But I promise I'm doing everything I can to get back as soon as possible. So today is a really cool opportunity for us to do something a little different. I was planning on doing this exact same lesson activity, whether I was in person or not in person today, for a couple of reasons. Reason one, I was out last week. All right, so I know you guys did a really good job taking care of your business, handling your assignments, but it's obviously different to learn on your own versus learning with the teacher. So I wanted to take today's opportunity to kind of hit pause, gather up all of the missing pieces and kind of the stuff that might have slipped through the cracks in the last couple of days today. And that way we can hit the ground hard going forward beginning tomorrow and Wednesday. Reason two is a lot of you guys have been out for either close contacts or for positive tests or for a variety of reasons. A lot of you, there's been a lot of missing students, and I didn't want us to zoom forward either, leaving kids behind. So today we have a cool opportunity to do what I call regroup, reteach. We'll cover some stuff we already learned previously, maybe didn't learn as well as we could have, and then apply with both Gilded Age industrialization and economic change. So today's actually going to be pretty text heavy and discussion heavy on your side of things. I'm just going to give a quick 3-slide lecture to make sure that I've given you the necessary content you need, whether you were in class last week or not, to move forward and access the text that you'll be using to apply today's learning to move forward with it. So the first slide is just the rise of big business. Right? One of the key era characteristics of this time period, often called the Gilded Age, is the rise of big business in America. We see big businesses like steel. Steel is, of course, going to be dominated by a man named Andrew Carnegie, who's going to use technological advancements like the Bessemer process to make a pure form of steel for cheaper and thus dominate the steel industry. While doing so, of course, paying his workers a terrible wage while getting obnoxiously rich for himself. Carnegie and steel, big business. Oil also becomes big business in America, and that will be dominated by a man named John D. Rockefeller, who's going to do things like bribe railroads, buy out competing oil refineries, what's called horizontal integration. Later, when the railroads try to charge him when he sees an unfair rate, skip the railroads altogether and build his own oil pipelines so he can distribute his own oil without relying on other companies, thus maximizing profits as well. So that is the way Rockefeller is going to take charge of the oil industry. The other two big businesses to be aware of in this era are railroads, which are extensive and incredibly important as the infrastructure backbone to this era, dominated by individuals like Jay Gould and Cornelius Vanderbilt. Railroads are going to take advantage of government subsidies of land to build railroads. And in a sense, government's going to give railroad companies, here, have all this land to build a railroad. Railroads will then build their railroad and sell that land off to settlers to make their own profit. And because railroads don't often have direct competition from other area railroads, because in the West, railroads are fairly well spread apart. Railroads are going to maximize their profits by being able to charge farmers and others on the frontier whatever the heck they want because lack of competition. And the fourth key industry is finance and banking. All of these businesses are going to need enormous amounts of capital, of money to have their acquisitions, to buy off their competitors, to do all sorts of mergers and the like. And that's going to be dominated by potentially the most significant and influential of all these, who is J.P. Morgan. So these are the four key big businesses that really come to dominate the era. Some of the tactics they're going to use to maintain control, to maximize profits, to reduce competition. Those are kind of the three big foci of big business. The first is horizontal integration. I talked about this a little bit earlier with John Rockefeller and buying up competitor entities within his same industry. So for Rockefeller, it was buying up competing oil Refineries, for rail, for Gold and Vanderbilt, maybe buying up competing railroads so that you're not competing at the same level of business as others. In today's world, it might be the analogy I gave you guys in class 2 weeks ago, which was having one person in a given area buy up all the gas stations. And that way they don't have to worry about competing with other gas stations. They can charge whatever the heck they want. Another key tactic is vertical integration. It's gonna be really, really significant for both Rockefeller and Carnegie to do what's called vertical integration. And what that means is removing all the middlemen from your business. In a sense, you as the business are going to take the raw material, you're going to transport it yourself to your own factory where you turn that raw material into a manufactured good. You will then transport it yourself within your own business to the market and sell it in the market yourself. So you're not having to pay others to do services for you within this business, and thus you reduce costs. When you reduce costs, you can charge less than your competitors. When you charge less than your competitors, you can put them out of business, and then you can horizontally integrate and maximize your profits. Companies are also going to form trusts. Once the government and the public starts getting wise to some of these tactics and says, that's not really good, we don't like that, they're going to form trusts, which are elaborate schemes to create monopolies that don't look like a monopoly. Companies are going to merge together to look like they're two different companies, but they're going to operate as one company. So then it looks like there's competition, but there really isn't. And all this, also these businesses are going to use outright corruption, bribing politicians, bribing public officials, giving kickbacks to congressmen to look the other way or to pass laws that are beneficial to the big business as well. Some of the effects of the rise of big business, there's some good ones. There's a lot of bad ones. One effect is monopolies. This idea of businesses dominating the entire sector, the entire industry of the given industry, whatever it is, with the removal of competition. However, for many, this era and the rise of big business is also going to increase the standard of living. Americans are going to have access to more consumer goods. Food is going to be cheaper because of mass production. Energy costs are going to be cheaper because of mass production, because of oil, kerosene, and later electricity. People are going to have light in their homes and in their communities. So there is, in fact, an increased standard of living. We're also going to see an increased middle class of managers who are going to run the factories and the business, these big businesses that aren't going to be the ownership class or the working class. This middle management class is going to see a significantly increased standard of living. But on the more negative side, we're going to see an increased wage gap. As in this era, the rich are going to get richer and the poor are going to get a little richer, but not nearly as much as the rich. We see a bigger gap between the rich and the poor in society. Also in this era, we're going to see a reduction of skilled labor as more and more workers are going to be treated as replaceable by doing smaller and smaller and smaller tasks in the production process. Thus, not all, but most labor is going to be unskilled and replaceable labor. And that's going to go hand in hand with the idea of what's called Taylorism or scientific management, which goes hand in hand with the reduction of skilled labor. Scientific management is to try to make your business as efficient as possible. And in doing so, you want to train every person at work to do a small task, a small replaceable task. Think about having 30 people put a car together, right? It might be your job to just put the windshield on. It might be your job to just put on the front right tire. It might be your job to just put in the steering wheel, right? So that if you start asking for a raise, or if you're missing from work, we can replace you really easily by finding some other idiot who can put a steering wheel on a car. Right? That's Taylorism, scientific management to maximize efficiency, but in doing so, you reduce skilled labor, making every task as simple as possible. Now, the question becomes why didn't the government do something about all of this? If there's corruption and scandal and rich people getting enormously rich and paying their workers a terrible wage, why not? And the answer to that question is this era is characterized by what's called laissez-faire economics. Now, laissez-faire is French, of course. We discussed this before in this class, for to let be, to let stand, or to leave alone. Right? So in this case, when I say laissez-faire economics, what that means is the government's going to leave businesses alone. Going to say, do what you want, do what you got to do. We're going to look the other way. Now, why? Now, both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans in the Gilded Age, are going to embrace laissez-faire economics, and this is important for you to note, but both parties are going to do so for two very different reasons. The Democrats are the party, as they have been up to this point since the days of Jefferson, days of Jackson, of smaller government, smaller federal government, states' rights. Therefore, because they believe in smaller, less powerful, less present government shouldn't regulate business, right? This belief in small government logically leads to a place in which the government does not regulate business because big government is antithetical to the Democratic Party in this era. The Republicans on the other side, they believe in bigger government, right? We talked about the Republicans of the Civil War, embracing things like tariffs, that's bigger government, the Homestead Act, banking, finance, the draft, production, all those things that are bigger government. But the Republicans are also very pro-business, right? The Republicans follow in the legacy of the Whigs and the Federalists who embrace pro-business policies. And because they're bigger government, but also pro-business, they're going to use bigger government not to regulate business, but to support business with pro-industry, pro-business policies like a protective tariff, that's pro-business, like embracing the gold standard. We'll talk about that more in class next week, don't worry, but noted for today as a Republican campaign plank that is pro-business. And these policies are going to embrace business growth at the expense of the working class. Now, as you should know from even pre-Civil War, antebellum, market revolution America, the Democratic Party and the industrial working class are closely aligned. Right? The industrial working class is in general pro-Democrat, but because the Democrats are a small government, the industrial working class then doesn't get the governmental support for their demands, their needs like they might otherwise. So thus, both parties, Democrats and Republicans in the Gilded Age, take a non-regulatory approach to big business, like we just discussed, for two very different reasons. Additionally, we see both parties embracing and participating in scandals that are tied to big business, as was in your text. So you should be able to make sure you're aware of both scandals and what they mean for business. The Credit Mobilier scandal, which deals with railroad companies, getting a bunch of money from Congress to build railroads, but not really building railroads, but giving shares back to Congress people in bribes and kickbacks. So the Credit Mobilier deals with railroads. And the whiskey ring also, earlier in the Gilded Age, in the Ulysses Grant presidency, is going to deal with government officials taking bribes, which will be collecting whiskey taxes. So both parties are going to be caught up in various scandals in the era because of their close relationship with big business. Now, there are two exceptions to this rule. There's always exceptions to every rule, except the rule that says I can't come to work today. Apparently, there's no exceptions to that rule. Exception number one is the Interstate Commerce Act. We're talking about this a little bit earlier in this unit, the Interstate Commerce Act, which was passed and designed to regulate railroads after the Supreme Court ruling Wabash versus Illinois that ruled that that states themselves, in this case, Illinois, could not regulate railroads because they are an example of interstate commerce. Congress steps in, passes this Interstate Commerce Act, which is designed to regulate railroads. The act itself requires, what's in the act is just and fair pricing, meaning the railroads have to charge you a fair price. But it doesn't exactly say who decides what a fair price is or what to do when railroads don't charge a fair price. So this law is passed to regulate railroads. Unfortunately, is ineffective. It does not have its intended effect of actually regulating railroads because it is written to be intentionally vague, broad, and thus ineffective. In a sense, the way I put this law is passed to shut the public up about regulating railroads, not to actually be effective in regulating railroads. So that the government can look to people and say, look, we passed this law to regulate railroads, even though the law itself is very ineffective in doing so. The next significant attempt at regulating big business is the Sherman Antitrust Act. And it is exactly what it says. It's an act that makes trusts illegal, this form of monopolies. It makes monopolies, quote unquote, illegal. But like the Interstate Commerce Act 3 years before, it is vague, makes it very difficult to enforce. And what the law actually says is any group coming together to interfere with business has to be broken up. And because it's worded that way, the government actually uses this act not against big business for the most part, but against unions that go on strike by saying, well, look, they're stopping business, they're stopping trade, they're stopping commerce by being on strike. Therefore, they're violating the law. And unfortunately, this law ends up hurting labor unions much more than it hurts big business. So this era is full of amazing political cartoons, which is one reason I'm incredibly sad to be home. Here are two good examples that show exactly what I'm talking about. Here we have our friend John D. Rockefeller. And as you can see, he's the big guy who's controlling the entire government in his hands. Here he is putting his people in the White House with bags of money. Here we have the US Capitol building has been turned into a Standard Oil refinery, which is of course not literal, but a metaphor for what the government's actually doing. The Treasury Department as well is a refinery. So in a sense, this cartoon, and there's all we see in Washington, D.C. are just barrels and barrels and barrels and barrels of oil. This cartoon, of course, is arguing that Rockefeller is the man behind the government, and he's using the government to his advantage at whatever cost, which is in some ways not an unfair depiction of the era itself. This is, of course, one of my favorites. This cartoon is titled "The Bosses of the Senate." We have all these senators sitting at their desks doing Congress business, right? You know the senators, the Senate, 2 per state, you know this. And there they all are looking back at who their actual bosses are, right? And we see the Copper Trust, the Steel Trust, the Standard Oil Trust, the Sugar Trust, coal, right? All these different trusts or monopolies are the ones that are actually running the country, right? We see here also in the background of this cartoon, which I want you to be aware of, the entrance for monopolists. Monopolist is open as these big guys are coming in, but the people's entrance back here in the corner, the people's entrance is barred, shut, and closed. And then, of course, this sign says, this is the Senate. This Senate is for the monopolists, by the monopolists, of the monopolists. And of course, that should be replaced with people, but the people are being shut out, and the real people that are running our government are big businessmen. So 2 good cartoons, right? Got our boy Rockefeller manipulating his way into the White House. We got these trusts that are the ones actually running the country. And I think both do a pretty good job of showing some of the criticisms of this laissez-faire policy that is embraced by both parties. Now, the justifications and responses to all of this are threefold. Be aware of all 3. The first, gospel of wealth. I put all 3 into first-person quotes to try to help explain what these all are. The gospel of wealth is being championed by a variety of people, primarily Andrew Carnegie. He's going to say, it's not his quote, this is a me quote, speaking as Andrew Carnegie. I don't need the government to regulate my business because look at all this good I'm doing for society. I'm donating all this money to scholarships and to colleges and to universities and to museums, while also paying my workers next to nothing in terrible working conditions, which is why I have so much money to donate in the first place. So we see with this gospel of wealth ideology, Carnegie and others like Rockefeller creating colleges, donating to scholarships that still exist today. If you're going to Hamilton, you look at your Hamilton student workbook, look at the back, look at one of those logos. That is an organization, a foundation that is formed by one of these individuals. I'll let you figure out who. It still exists today to give money to the arts, to cultural experiences, to programs, right? That is a result of the gospel of wealth approach and ideology. The second is social Darwinism, which is in some ways related to the gospel of wealth. They're 2 ideologies in kind of the same vein. And this is going to say the rich are the rich because they are more qualified, right? They're rich because they're better off. They're smarter. They work harder. They're better people. They have better morals. That's why they're rich. Thus, if we're going to take their money and give it to poor people, that's actually anti-Darwinistic. It's bad for society. We're upsetting the natural order, and we're going to hold society back by propping up people, groups, individuals who are actually not qualified to have that type of opportunity. And the third is more of a response and a justification. It's labor unions. I spent a lot of time talking about this in our video last week. And this approach is quite simple, that if the working classes, right, there's more of us than there are of them, the working class organizes themselves together, there's power in numbers, they'll be able to impose order, stability, and structure on the industrial class and make themselves more replaceable. Excuse me, less replaceable. Make themselves less replaceable, right? Because if I'm just the guy putting the steering wheel on the car, I'm easy to replace. But if all of us are in a union together, now we're much harder to replace. And that's the approach of labor unions like the American Federation of Labor, the Knights of Labor, and others. The Railroad Labor Union that was responsible for the Pullman strike from last week's video. A variety of labor unions, but it's important to note that one of the reasons these labor unions fall short in their response to big business is because repeatedly, when they embrace their biggest tactic, which is the strike, going on strike, the government's going to side with big business and force them back to work. All right, that does it for me today. Today's prompt and task. Fortunately, as you can see here behind me, a lot of books, a lot of books, a lot of books, a lot of books. So and there's all history books. I'm a nerd. I'm sorry. When I was sitting here in the last couple of days trying to figure out what the heck I was going to do to give you the material you needed, but doing so in a way that was a little bit more engaging and applicable, what I came up with was pulling excerpts from one of my favorite books in this time period called A Nation Without Borders, the United States and Its World in an Age of Civil Wars, 1830 to 1910, by a great historian named Stephen Hahn. Here's look, so the mine's a little more disheveled and beaten up in that picture there. Stephen Hahn's a good dude. Heck of a historian, and I think you'll appreciate the way he writes this text. What I did was I pulled a bunch of short little excerpts from this book, each of which is illuminating of one of the key shifts that is influenced by the Gilded Age economy in the era. So your prompt, which I pulled right off of College Board's website, so this is an applicable, relevant, aligned, specific College Board prompt from the year 2017. Evaluate the extent to which, of course, what that means in our language is how much? How much did the Gilded Age economy, how much did the economy in this era create change in the US from 1870 to 1900? So you have this 30-year window of time, right after the Civil War, all the way through 1900. How much does the economy create change? So I gave you 3 slides of discussion on the economy. What you're going to do now is you're going to look through these excerpts. I'll let you space on the right-hand side there. And in each little chunk, you're going to just tell me on the right-hand side, tell yourself on the right-hand side, what is the key economic change in that chunk of text, right? All the way down throughout, right? A bunch of short excerpts that I pulled from his chapter on economic changes in the Gilded Age, go figure. I think you'll appreciate it. I think you'll enjoy it. The directions are pretty clear on the paper. But again, if I'm not there, if you're watching this video, it's because I can't test negative. It's not because I can't help you. So feel free to use your mind, use email, send a carrier pigeon. I don't care. If you need help, you need support, you want to discuss things, just let me know. Love you all. Enjoy the text, work together, but make sure you gain your own understanding, because whether I'm in class today or not, this will be part of your period 6 test, and this will be part of your AP test at the end of the year. Love you all. Holla if you need anything, and I will talk to you. God, I hope it's soon. Bye, guys.